and it will be made available via the GTA website. If I could ask you please to keep your microphones on mute during the webinar to avoid any feedback issues and background noise, that would be much appreciated. There will be lots of time for questions at the end. We do want to hear from you. You can either keep your questions to the end or use the Zoom group chat function. I'll be keeping an eye on it during the webinar, and I'll be coordinating the Q&A at the end. For those of you who have just joined us, welcome. I'm delighted to introduce Hussein Sinan. So over to you, Hussein, Sinan.
Do you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it. Great. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the GTA for inviting me to take part in this webinar to talk to you all. Though the market has entered into fisheries governance, especially RFMO fisheries governance arena, a bit late. It is important that as part of the broker between consumer and the fisherman, market has a crucial role to play in RFMO governance. Thus, I'm delighted to present the paper that myself and my supervisor published earlier in the year in the Journal of Sustainability, as Dr. Tom mentioned. So the paper highlights the understanding all the barriers to the allocation and provides a general framework. But I'll try to focus today's presentation about the role of the markets and retailers, wholesalers, and brand names, and how some of these barriers could be eliminated. So before going into detail of the presentation, I would like to spend some time on a funny cartoon, especially as an academic that researches on political economy and also on fisheries governance. The conclusion isn't really that humans are garbage, but that fish are a common pool resource which are challenging to govern with complex issues of resource conservation, allocation, and equity, and also about justice. But to condense into the three main puzzles or pieces of the puzzle on fisheries governance and especially on RFMO fisheries governance, there are three main components to it. One is on management procedures, which are a set of pre-agreed rules by managers and scientists on how total allowable catches are determined in a fishery. And allocation and administrative measures are basically determines how these total global allowable catch is divided into individual countries and how much they get to fish. So basically the monitoring and compliance component of the puzzle provides the measures that have adopted with, on how the measures on allocation and also the management procedures are followed by member states. Without these fundamentals, RFMOs will continue to deter in future. So focusing on allocation and the importance of allocation, Lodge and others mentioned in the best practices, in a report about best practices of RFMOs, that the success or otherwise of an allocation process has the potential to permeate all other decisions taken by an RFMO, and thus has the potential either to secure or to undermine the primary conservation regime in an RFMO. But it's easier said than done. RFMOs are made up of member states with diverse objectives. Adding to the complexity is the issues with data collection, differences in developmental status of the fishery, the transboundary nature of stocks, the economic and social importance of the fishery, and also the complexities with different types of gears. So it's easier said than done. Looking into the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, which lies from East Africa to the Western Australia and Indonesia, there are diverse, objectives from different member countries. In the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, there are 32 member countries which are involved in adopting conservation and management measures. And there are also two cooperating non-contracting parties, Liberia and Senegal, primarily involves in transshipping from ports around the Indian Ocean to outside world. But then there are also coastal states that are not part of any RFMO, for example, countries like Singapore, which are also involved in transshipping and providing port shipment activities for IOTC member states. So this is a typical IOTC meeting. Some of you might not have gone to an IOTC meeting. So usually around 160 to 300 members, colleagues meet together around to determine on how an allocation or how conservation and management measures are adopted. And this has not at all worked in the past. For example, looking into the stock status table from 2010 to 2019, you could see that a lot of species are in the red zone or overfished and overfishing state. And looking at the table, you could see only skipjack tuna, swordfish, kawakawa, and blue sharks are the only species in the IOTC that are in the healthier state. So it's not an optimistic look, but looking at the catch figures, the IOTC member states have increased their catches, surpassing around 2 million tons in 2017. But looking at the graph, you could see that only out of the 32 member countries, around 7 countries catches around 86% of the tuna species in the Indian Ocean. But there are also significant differences among those countries that fish. For example, Iran, Sri Lanka, Oman, Yemen, and Malaysia catches a lot of neritic species compared to tropical tuna such as skipjack, yellowfin, and big eye. And neritic species are mostly used and consumed locally by locals. And EU, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Seychelles catch a lot of tropical tuna. But there are differences not only in their catches, but also there are differences in how countries depend on these species. For example, some countries depend on providing licenses to foreign fishing vessels to access into their exclusive economic zones. And also there are countries primarily depending on export and trade and processing. For example, Thailand, which has a small fishery compared to other countries. And there are countries that primarily depends on local consumption. For example, in the Maldives, people consume around 158 kilograms per person per year of tuna. So that's a huge figure compared to all the other countries. And there are significant importance. There are countries that are primarily depend on employment and wealth distribution. For example, in Seychelles and Maldives, the employment contributes to over 20% of their total employment. There are divergent views and management objectives for fisheries, for tuna management of these countries. So with all those differences, going into an allocation isn't that simple, and IOTC has proven that it's not simple. From 2010, when the resolution was adopted to speed up the allocation process in IOTC, it didn't really work until 2017 when the Maldives and South Africa tabled a conservation and management measure on how to speed up the allocation process. And the allocation process has sped up a little bit after that, but still without much agreement between those countries, even though there has been around 6 to 7 meetings after 2017, between 2017 and 2020. The last one being a virtual meeting with a new chair, with the diverse objectives compared to where we started. When the allocation process started in 2010, there were around 6 or 7 proposals submitted by member countries on how allocation would be done. But now on the table in the last few years, there has been 2 proposals, one by the European Union and the other by the coastal states. The European Union's proposal basically allocates around 80% of the allocation into historical catches. The countries that has had a fishery in the past gets around 80% of their catch. While there are also components to least developing countries, small island developing states, and coastal states. And there's also a correctional factor. The correctional factors are dependent on how much finance, for example, are provided to the IOTC, to science, and also to the amount of imports into a country, and these also benefit again to countries that have had historical catch. The coastal states proposal is also very similar to the EU proposal, and you could see the only difference is that there is a portion allocated for Human Development Index and GNI, and also on the size of EEZs as well. And there's also a supplementary allocation for all states, recognizing that there is a right to fish on the high seas. And you could see that there are significant similarities between the 2 proposals, but there is a significant one. There's one significant difference between the 2 proposals on how historical catches are attributed to. Coastal states believe that the fish that's been caught in their EEZs, or the exclusive economic zones, should belong to them, even though distant water fishing fleet fished for them. But distant water fishing nations believe that the fish that they have caught in the coastal states have already been paid for and fished by the distant water fishing nations, and thus that has to belong to those fishing countries. But however, there has been movement in the last few years. The European Union has agreed that 10% of the fish that's been caught in the coastal states exclusive economic zones, or their area, would be allocated to the coastal states. But then coastal states has refused to that. But these are all technical discussions, and these technical discussions could be overcome in negotiations. But there are significant barriers that have stopped the allocation process in the IOTC, and I would like to focus on those in the next few minutes. So the first one is on the relationship between FAO and IOTC. FAO is, to put in an easier sense, IOTC is a baby of an FAO. IOTC evolved through the FAO system, and IOTC is the only tuna RFMO within the FAO. But as GTA highlighted in their press release after the end of the IOTC Commission this year, 90 minutes was spent primarily on how to elect an executive secretary, on a procedure to elect an executive secretary. And this boils down again to the disruption between the poor relationship between FAO and IOTC, despite the crucial role FAO played in the development of IOTC. And the frustrations of members primarily lie due to the inability of the integration of fishing entities such as Taiwan, which I would highlight later on, and also the perceived interference of FAO in the tuna governance and lack of flexibility and autonomy in operating under the FAO system. For example, the Commission adopted a recruitment procedure for the executive secretary in consultation with FAO last week. And primarily it gives only it allows only 3 members of IOTC to participate in the selection procedure of the IOTC's executive secretary. So it kind of hinders the lack of flexibility and autonomy in the operation of IOTC itself. But then some states opt to remain due to the perceived security of being in the FAO framework and the ability of FAO to assist if things go wrong. And developing coastal states also take into account the reliance of FAO's assistance in the development projects in those countries as well. So those countries do not want to break that relationship with FAO and IOTC, and this process would go on. The second one is on the time gap between data reporting and decision making, and this is quite crucial in the IOTC. For example, in the IOTC, member states are mandated to send data for example, in 2017 June, member states send data on their fishing activities of 2016 in 2017's June. And the scientific committee advises the commission based on that data of 2016 in December of 2017. And one whole year passes on without any decision making by the commission. So the commission meets again in the following year, in 2018, to decide on conservation and management measures based on 2016. The measures come into force 120 days later. And if a member state objects to the measure, again, another 30 days is given for other countries to join that objection or to keep the measure in force. So usually the measures come into force in November or December. So usually 2 years has taken place, and 2 years of fishing has taken place without a conservation and management measure in place. So I'll look into detail, giving you an example on how this has hindered the conservation and management measures. And this has been one of the prominent measures that the Global Tuna Alliance and others have raised in the last few months. So I'll really focus on that. The IOTC Scientific Committee in 2015 put the yellowfin tuna as overfished, and overfishing is occurring. So the commission, the scientific committee advised to a 20% reduction, and the markets and NGOs pressured the commission to take measures, and the commission adopted a measure in 2016, again based on 2014's data, to catches, and the measure applies to vessels about 24 meters in length, has different reduction categories. And then, for example, persons are mandated to reduce for 15%, gill net 10, long line 10, and other gears 5%. But what really happened was in the following year, Seychelles requested to change the base year from 2014 to 2015 intersessionally, and Maldives objected to do it intersessionally and asked the commission to take a measure. And there are several reasons. One of those being, for example, Seychelles catches in 2014 was 25,000 metric tons. And under the measure, which was adopted in 2016, the Seychelles was, the person vessels had to reduce by 15%. That means they have to reduce by 21,000 metric tons. And while the measures were not discussed at all, or the measures has been, the scientific committee has been working on it, Seychelles increased their catches to 40,900 tons. So 15,000 tons increase in 2015 alone. So if the measure was in place, asking the Seychelles to reduce their catches from 2015 to a 15% reduction, that would mean Seychelles has to reduce by around 47% compared to 2015. And this led to a lot of calls by Seychelles, in the fishing industry to intervene and to change the base year from 2014 to 2015. But at the time of adoption of the commission by the commission would not have that data in place. And Seychelles argued that the decision will force their person vessels to be grounded to around 5 to 6 months. and their main economic activity being tourism and fishing, 47% reduction would have had a huge impact on their economy. And thus the commission agreed to allow small island developing states to opt a baseline of 2014 or 2015, accommodating the Seychelles request. A similar thing happened in 2019, last year, in the IOTC Commission as well, where a revision for the current conservation management measure 1901 was revised based with penalties and closed some of the loopholes, where still some of those loopholes remain open. So the 2019 measure had similar limits, but then the catch reduction for Mauritius was changed from 15 to 7.5% of 2018 levels. When the commission adopted the measure in 2019, the data of 2018 was not available to the commission, and the commission was forced to take decisions based on data the commission didn't have at the time. So it's quite crucial that this time gap has to be reduced for the commission to adopt conservation and management measures, and this would play a crucial role in the allocation as well. So looking at different RFMOs, tuna RFMOs, for example, WCPFC in the Western Central Pacific, the data submission is in April, the scientific committee meets in August, and then the commission makes a decision on November or December of the same year. So there's only 1 year time gap, and this improves the conservation and management measure itself. But when data when there is enough data as well, the commission has lacked in the past. Because IOTC is a consensus-based decision-making body, the measures agreed are of a lowest common denominator. For example, looking at the 2018 billfish conservation management measure, where they focus on strip marlins and sailfish, and looking at paragraph 2, it mandates that CPCs shall endeavor to ensure that all overall catches of the Indian Ocean billfish do not exceed either the MSY level or, in the absence, the lower limit of the MSY range as well. But looking at the data that the commission had in 2016 when the measure was in place, almost all the species has passed the MSY limits. For example, black marlin, the 2016 level of catch was 17,000 tons, but the MSY was around 9,000 tons. So the commission took a measure which is basically toothless. Moving on, looking at the political barriers, the most significant barrier that I highlighted before is the issue between Taiwan and China. Taiwan is a huge fishing nation in the IOTC, but then since IOTC is an FAO body under the United Nations framework, Taiwan cannot participate. Instead of Taiwan, China are mandated to take part in the discussions. But Taiwan participates as an invited expert right now and has a very limited participation. And basically, it has a similar participation as an observer in the IOTC. And China does not represent Taiwan's concerns, even though they fall under the One China policy. The second political barrier is on disputed territories. And this was really evident in this year's commission meeting, in the virtual meeting as well. The difficulties the commission would faces with all these disputes. And these are all the statements that both United Kingdom and Mauritius has submitted and has taken floor in the commission at several parts of the commission meeting itself. These disputes, unless resolved, would have a long-lasting impact on any allocation. Mauritius will contest any allocation for British Indian Ocean territories or France overseas territories or vice versa. And these needs to be resolved bilaterally and instead of the IOTC commission meeting itself. The next one I'll focus is on civil wars and conflicts. Somalia, Yemen, Sudan, and Sri Lanka has had civil wars and fisheries conflicts over the years, and these have hindered them from improving their fisheries in the past. Some fisheries have had disastrous effect on their coastal communities. Um, so looking back at the allocation tables that has been on the negotiation table right now, most of them based on catch history, the performance of those countries in the past. Um, so if these catch history is the main factor in the allocation, the states that have not had much access to the fishery resources will get less in the future. And these were brought up by Somalia and Sri Lanka and delegations in the last few meetings. But then countries who have had ongoing civil wars are also absent from these meetings, such as Sudan and Yemen. So what will happen to them in the future is also a big question, because the allocation are discussed without them being present, and their concerns are not taken on board. So the final political barrier is on subsidies. In 2018, for example, China, the EU, Republic of Korea, Japan, and Thailand contributed to around 51% of the global subsidies. That's around 18.26 billion US dollars of the global estimated subsidies. And it is also estimated that these countries spent around 12.6 billion US dollars in 2018 for capacity enhancement subsidies to enhance their fishing capacity. Um, and these 5 countries has, fished in 2016 has fished 63% of skipjack tuna, 42% of yellowfin tuna, and 88% of big eye tuna. So, and these subsidies have contributed to creating fishing catch histories for these 5 countries in the past. And this also posed a significant barrier for coastal states and coastal developing states. So what's the role of GTA as retailers and brand names and wholesalers who plays a significant role in connecting consumers and fishermen? There's a significant, and processors as well. So there's a significant role to play by the market. For example, countries that subsidize their fleets, markets can continue to push to eliminate that. As you all might recall, UN Global Sustainable Development Goal 14.6 states by 2020 to prohibit certain forms of fisheries subsidies which contribute to overcapacity and overfishing. And clearly in the IOTC, this is the case where a lot of species are being overfished, and subsidies continue to pour in by these countries. And that's something that the GTA could work on. The second one is to to resolving the time gap. The market can push member countries for better reform at IOTC level through member states which they source from. It is evident that the time gap has huge implications to the decision-making process in IOTC, and this could be resolved. The scientific barriers and the lowest common denominator is often linked to poor data collection in IOTC. From 2014 to 2018, IOTC, in IOTC, around 48% of the tropical tuna were caught by artisanal fishermen. And most of these were estimated by IOTC's secretariat because of a lack of data that can go into the stock assessment models. And so there is a need to improve that data. But then industrial fishing vessels are not immune from poor data as well. As you all might recall, Spain has had data issues in 2017 and 2018 as well. And this has been recognized by the scientific community as data that is implausible to be used in stock assessment. So one of the things that GTA could do is to set, in ICAT, for example, in the Atlantic, there is a broader capacity building fund to improve capacity of developing coastal states to access to science, and also on decision-making process. In IOTC, there's a meeting participation fund where scientists are able to travel to participate in the scientific process as well. So in concluding, allocation is a difficult negotiation, but achievable, and it dictates how the RFMO will survive in the future. For that, equity needs to be in the center that takes into account the needs of the states that are dependent on the resource for their well-being, and also developing countries which have aspirations to develop their fishery. While at the same time conserving under the resources under their mandate. It's not an easy task when there are different divergent objectives. Everyone at the negotiation table, including member states, NGOs, retailers, and processors, all of them needs to focus on the need to work as a collective, to work together as a collective to resolve those issues. And there needs to be a constant dialogue. And this has been one of the limiting factors in IOTC because of the political divide between distant water fishing nations and coastal states. And recognizing that most of the time there is a willingness to compromise. But then without the main issue has been the lack of understanding of conservation and management measures. And this could be overcome with a more focused understanding and push for sustainability. And there needs to be a more focus on understanding what sustainability means to those people at the end of the line who holds a fishing rod and to fish to sustain their livelihood, and what allocation means to them in the future. I would like to thank the International Pole and Line Foundation for funding my PhD, and my supervisory team led by Dr. Megan Bailey, and my awesome lab mates. So thank you. I'll open for any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Simon. That was incredibly interesting, and I've had some very positive feedback in the chat already about the slides you presented, so that's really good. So we've got some time for questions, and I know Simon is very keen to answer any you may have. So I'm happy to open this up. If you just want to shout out your question, that's great, or if you would rather use the group chat, that's equally good. I'll keep an eye on it and make sure that everyone has a chance to answer a question. But while you're having a think about it, I've got a quick one there just to confirm, Simon. I was taking notes about the role that the market can do to assist in this. And the first one, eliminating harmful subsidies. That's actually part of our 5-year strategy. Number 2, reform the IOTC and other RFMOs. And I think one of the things we've noted is the gap between the science and the management decision is really quite ridiculous. And then finally, capacity building. Was there any that I've missed there that the market can do to get involved in?
These are the main components where it could focus the discussion, and where markets can have a crucial role. I believe for example, Global Tuna Alliance, and TUPA, these are very new alliances and new into the global tuna RFMO groups, where in the past we've seen that retailers and markets provide letters, and we haven't seen market present in the commission meetings, and these all provide the presence itself provides a real engagement between member states and also the market. Providing letters, and often member states would read those letters and focus their decision making around those letters. But the engagement is really key importance. While looking at my research for my next paper that's going to be out really soon, member states have really recognized that the lack of engagement by retailers and going into RFMO meetings. So that's also something that RFMO, the retailers and markets could take into account.
Thanks very much, and I'm very interested to see that. Sarah, over to you.
Hi, Sinan. It's Sarah from Worldwide Foods. That was a really interesting presentation. Thank you. I understand that you were part of the Commission meeting last week, all of the meetings each day last week. I'm just interested to get your view on or your thoughts on the outcomes of that meeting.
It's difficult. First of all, recognizing that it's a virtual meeting, and it's really important to recognize that the negotiations for a conservation and management measure really doesn't happen on the floor of a commission meeting. So the real negotiations happen inside meetings, in corners, in near dinner tables, and near coffee tables. These are where the places where real negotiation take place. So a virtual meeting really prohibits those kind of intense negotiations on a conservation and management measure. So it's really difficult to comprehend or to agree on a measure such as the yellowfin, for example, the yellowfin measure, or skipjack harvest control rules, or big eye tuna measures. So it's really difficult to adopt one. So going into the meeting, the main objective, I believe, for most member states was to have a timeline for next year to have these measures in place, to have a special meeting, which the GTA and other NGOs had called for. And recognizing those member states have actually agreed to a measure, but and we have to wait and see how those would go. But with the COVID pandemic, we have to keep one eye on how these meetings will go, will progress in the next few months. The importance is to have bilateral meetings by member states, and the markets could push member states to have those bilateral meetings between member states and groups as well. For example, the coastal states group work as a collective, and also the distant water fishing nations work as a collective as well. So it's really important to have those discussions before an actual meeting takes place in March and March or April. So there wasn't nothing unexpected of from the Commission last week. Yeah.
Thank you.
We have a question on the chat box from Michael Cohen at ISSF. How do the negotiations about allocation on tuna intersect with trade policy between these countries on other commodities?
Oh, so this is really important. One of the things that myself and Dr. Tom had during my interview of Dr. Tom for my, about how trade policies would interact, with other commodities. When, for example, not only on allocation, but also with on conservation and management measures. As you could recall on my slide, India, for example, doesn't have much exports to the international market. Iran, Pakistan doesn't have much, exports. Oman as well, but they do export other commodities to the retail chain. And this also, though it's a difficult process, markets could play a crucial role in identifying those, because for example, limiting yellowfin tuna into the markets, into the European Union and to the UK markets, would only have an impact on those countries that export tuna and tuna-like species to those markets. But then countries, as evident in the catch figures of 2019 that was released this year by the Working Party on Tropical Tuna, countries that do not export to the international markets have increased their catches, and to a certain extent extent, countries that also exports and have processing industry also had increased their catches. But then that's something where markets could really, take into account the vast range of products that they export from these countries. Also could be in play when if there needs to be a real engagement or a real push by the market for effective conservation and management measures in IOTC, including allocation as well. Then the second point on trade policy would be how it would impact, how it would have an impact on the processing industry and also on the market, on trade between countries. For me, I believe, this is a personal opinion, I believe it would improve the allocation principle. So the allocation regime would improve those. For example, if seashells get a reduced catch allocation, for example, there might be countries that might not have a huge fishery at the time being, and would want to trade their allocation to Seychelles, who has already a good fisheries in place. So that transfer of allocation or transfer of catches between those countries would also improve that trade discussions. And the second point is when the allocation regime would put into a place where the member states would trade tuna as a collective rather than individual countries. That would also improve, the not only on the allocation process, but also the monitoring and compliance, and also the conservation regime, because everyone around the negotiation table would want to sustain the resource for them to benefit not only from catching of those, but also trade of those products. For example, Kenya or Somalia might not want to invest millions and millions of dollars and subsidize their fleet to go into a fishery. They might want to trade their allocation with a developed country or a developing coastal state to improve their fishery, to get maximum rent from the fishery. So that kind of facilitates a trade movement from member countries as well.
Great, thank you very much. Michael, does that work for you?
Yes, thank you very much for that explanation and insight.
Great, thank you. We've had a question on the chat, one. It's a not very straightforward one. How do we solve a problem like the Chagos Islands? That's quite an expansive question for you there, Simon.
Well, on an allocation regime, there has been some texts that has been forwarded to Mauritius delegation, and I think that on how this would play out. For example, the proposal by the G16 to Mauritius government included that when Chagos and Mauritius resolve their diplomatic legal disputes, any changes in the allocation would be reflected based on those legal ramifications, and market could again play a role in there as well, because that really gives Mauritius a good advantage, because if Mauritius, the issue with Mauritius and Chagos is resolved in favor of Mauritius, the allocation of Chagos or in British Indian Ocean territories then goes to the to the Mauritius. So that kind of again is a move forward. But then realizing that the stocks will not wait until an allocation regime is agreed in IOTC. That's something that all member states has to recognize. The fishermen will continue to fish, as we've seen. Countries would change their fishing strategy. When one fish stock has been overfished, they would go into other fish stocks, and that process will continue until there is an allocation being agreed. The three components that I mentioned, a management procedure, the allocation regime, and a comprehensive monitoring compliance measures as well. I hope I've undiplomatically answered the question.
I think so. Thank you. Another question here for you. Would you see formalization of the G16 as a key step towards being able to affect progress in the IOTC or not?
The formalization process is also, I believe that's something the G16 has been working on in the last few years. That would also give a significant boost. But right now, the G16 has been a very informal body meeting on very irregular periods of time. It's basically to improve the decision framework. And even though it's been informal, it has improved the discussion in the IOTC. For the first time in 2019, I believe 21 coastal states spoke in the IOTC, and usually it's always been the distant water fishing nations, Maldives, Seychelles, and Mauritius that speak, and Australia that speaks up in the meetings, and even in this year in the virtual meeting, there has been very limited engagements by other states, and G16 has been providing that platform in understanding. I think the key word is for member states to understand what conservation and management measures means for them. And there's a really lack of understanding of coastal states in terms of tuna management, mainly because there is limited fishing in those countries. And the G16 brings that flavor and understanding for the coastal states. And formalizing that would attract funding as well to capacity building, and also would attract member states to work together as a collective for the conservation and betterment of the coastal communities as well. So I totally agree that the formalization process will have a positive effect in the IOTC. Though there are caveats to it as well, when you go as a collective, there are also instances where you protect some member states where even though they act irrationally, and that might also hinder the IOTC, the G16 process. But overall, I believe that the formalization of G16 would also eliminate some of those barriers, would be a positive step to eliminate some of the barriers that I've mentioned in the presentation.
Thank you. I have one further question on the chat box. Why do the other RFMOs or the other tuna RFMOs not have the relationship with the FAO that the IOTC does?
It's basically how it has been, because IOTC came into existence through the FAO process. FAO took the lead in the early days in the negotiation of the text, and even also in collecting data. So it has been led by FAO from the beginning itself, and FAO has refused to break that relationship, even though members have previously agreed that they want a divorce from FAO. But the FAO's Director General at that particular time did not want to submit any documents to IOTC Commission meeting because the DG has the power to block the documents that are being negotiated in IOTC itself. So it's really started because of how the role the FAO played in the initiation of the IOTC itself, and this has continued in the last few years. But all the other RFMOs, if you look at WCPFC, it has been a collective in WCPFC, it's been pushed by FFA and others, the coastal states in that region. In ICAT, the oldest one of the oldest RFMOs, it's been pushed by the developed countries in that region. So it has been a mixture of reasons. I hope I was able to answer that question.
Oh, I think that was great. Thank you. So there's no further questions on the chat box and no hands are up, but I'll give everyone a last opportunity in case there are any final questions. If you do think of anything afterwards, or you'd rather ask in private, do let me know, and I will forward the questions on to Simon. So as I don't see any further ones, I will say a big thank you very much for joining our webinar, and special thanks obviously for Simon for presenting. If you do have any feedback, or like I say, any questions you've got, please let me know. And I'd just like to thank Simon personally for joining us. It was an extremely interesting presentation. And like I say, there is a paper that supports the presentation. And if you would like a copy of it, I'm sure we can make that. Oh, no, we have a question. Oh, here we go. Here we go. What are your ideas for how to progress these issues intersessionally next year in a virtual format?
A lot of bilateral meetings, apart from the virtual meeting. So going into a virtual meeting, I believe would only be, there would only be time to iron out minor differences, but the major differences needs to be ironed out before a commission meeting. And as you've seen, Dr. Pickrell, in the last commission meeting as well, when it came to substantial meeting elements, there were really very limited discussions and agreements as well. So it would be really difficult to agree on something that's really complicated, and if there are divergent views on a virtual meeting. But then I believe that the commission agreed to have the special meeting's objective is to agree on a measure rather than working on a measure. So the bilateral meetings prior to those would play a significant role. And I believe I've heard from some of the coastal states, some of the important coastal states, that a draft measure would be developed hopefully by the first half, the first few months, the first few weeks of the year, and would be discussed bilaterally within the coastal states and also with distant water fishing nations. So that would be a really good positive step in speeding up some of the conservation and management measures that are on the negotiation table.
Great, thank you. And thanks for squeezing in that last question and answer. That's brilliant. There is a link to Simon's paper. It is open access. That's in the chat function. Thanks very much, Megan. That's very helpful. But I will obviously, I've got that as well. So do let me know if you need it. So on that note, I will close it down. Say a final thank you for you all to attending this. The webinar has been recorded and we will be sharing the link on the GTA website. So a final thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sinan.